body and grinding down the center.
Okay, we'll start with this per tweet from Michael Benson. Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn is reportedly being targeted for October 8th at the O2 Arena in London. It's claimed a deal between the pair at 156-pound catchweight is now close to completion. We know that people over there at Sky, it's almost like they attempted to make Chris Eubank Jr. the face of their particular brand of boxing, having parted ways with Matchroom and Hearn. They had high hopes for Chris Eubank Jr.
They just signed Liam Smith. He's over here fighting a Matchroom fighter.
A fight between Liam Beefy Smith and Chris Eubank Jr. at middleweight. It makes a lot more sense than what we're seeing here. Conor Benn is essentially jumping up 2 weight classes, 2 divisions, to take on Chris Eubank Jr., who really should be picking on somebody his own fucking size.
If he wins this fight, he don't get no credit from me.
Instead of targeting the guys at his own weight, a guy like a Yanni Bekalim Kanuli, for example, a guy who's in a pole position to become a world champion, Chris Eubank Jr. is choosing to take a cash fight with a naturally smaller fighter who's bearing all the risks here. If anybody's risking anything, it's Conor Benn. He's the naturally smaller fighter moving up from welterweight basically up to middleweight, because middleweight starts at 154 pounds, rather anything above 154 pounds. So if you're talking about 156, that's middleweight.
The junior middleweight limit is 154.
And the middleweight limit is 160. Thus, anything between 154 pounds and 160, that's middleweight. And Conor Benn is taking the leap of faith, whereas Chris Eubank Jr., the very underwhelming...
Where's your guts?
The fucking knife of this guy. He ducked the prime Gennady Golovkin years ago. Kell Brook, a welterweight, stood in his place. Got his face broken in the process. Years later, once Kell Brook retires after having the biggest fight of his career, who do you see calling him out? Chris Eubank Jr.
Where's your guts?
Where's your dignity? You see, Kell Brook campaigned as a welterweight for most of his career. He's a naturally smaller fighter than you are. He finally has his long-awaited, long-anticipated fight with Amir Khan. He wins that fight, retires, and Chris calls him out of retirement.
Fucking knife of this guy.
I was glad when I saw that Kell Brook decided to call it a career and didn't give Chris Eubank Jr. that opportunity, didn't give him the satisfaction, because Chris doesn't deserve it.
Him and his Diet Roy Jones Jr. impersonation.
Everybody's got that one guy in the sport of boxing. Really chaps their ass, really gets under the skin. At least for me, that's Chris Eubank Jr. The guy's shameless.
Dr. Prime Gennady Golovkin and let a welterweight stand in his place.
Called out a naturally smaller Kell Brook as Kell Brook announced his retirement from the sport of boxing. He even entertained a Terrence Crawford fight. Chris Eubank Jr., he's not confident in his abilities in spite of his swagger.
Pompous demeanor of his. He knows he's not the real thing.
Why do you think he keeps looking downstairs for opponents? Why do you think he keeps looking at welterweights while he's up there at middleweight? Conor Benn is the one showing all the heart here.
Chris Eubank Jr. is a fucking joke.
Silver spoon-fed underachiever who, if not for his namesake, likely wouldn't even make a splash in the sport of boxing. People wouldn't even know who he is if his last name weren't Eubank.
Conor Benn's involved. I get the sense this is going to be a Matchroom show.
Chris Eubank Jr., he's not an according to Hoyle Sky Sports fighter. He's actually with Wasserman. That's Kale and Nisei Sarlin of Wasserman Promotions. He's actually with Wasserman, not boxer Ben Shalom.
You think Eddie Hearn and DAZN will try to do this as a pay-per-view?
Well, I don't want to jump to conclusions and make bold proclamations, but on the assumption that this ends up being a Matchroom show on the DAZN platform, I could see this being billed as a pay-per-view in the United Kingdom, because this is a big fight. In spite of the very shameless tactics and business practices of Chris Eubank Jr. having the next generation of Eubank versus Benn.
Yeah, that'll get some attention in the UK. It will.
This generation's version of Benn versus Eubank, the initial meeting of their fathers way back when.
Chris Eubank won the first Nigel Benn fight way back when in 1990 by way of a 9th round TKO.
They had their second meeting, their second fight some years later, 1993, ended in a split draw. Here we are, many years later.
It was 29 fucking years ago. Almost 3 decades.
29 years later, their sons are set to do the dance in what promises to be a very big fight for whatever promoter ends up promoting it. And I think that's going to be Matchroom because, well, Conor Benn is involved. And we all know how invested Matchroom is in Conor Benn.
A lot of people felt that Matchroom was protecting that guy, that they were matching him soft.
In spite of rumors that Eddie was trying to negotiate a fight between Jose Ramirez and Conor Benn, people still felt that Eddie was matching that kid soft, protecting him, in spite of the politics at boxing that we're all aware of. In the welterweight division, that all the alphabet titles and a good number of the recognizable fighters, they're on the PBC side of things, and they're not going to do a Matchroom fighter any favors, yet, in spite of this, people still felt Eddie was protecting Conor, matching him soft. Well, how do you like them apples? He's got him going up there to middleweight to take on Chris Eubank Jr.
Is he still matching him soft now?
If this does end up being a Matchroom show, this will be a hard act to follow, a hard act for the people over there at Queensbury Promotions to follow, a hard act for the people over there at Boxer, Ben Shalom, Adam Smith, and Sky Sports. It'll be a hard act for them to follow as well.
Some people felt that because Boxer poached some of Eddie's fighters and still intends on poaching more.
Yeah, no. Savannah Marshall, April Hunter, Huey Fury, more recently Liam Smith, rumors about Lawrence Okolie leaving Matchroom, going over there to Sky.
I think Sky Sports, given the size of their platform, has the greatest potential to become Eddie's biggest adversary in the UK.
They do, but they're not there yet. That'll happen over time. For now, I defy you to show me somebody in the UK putting on bigger shows than Mr. Eddie Hearn. It damn sure ain't Frank Warren, and it's not Ben Shalom and Adam Smith either, between the Joshua versus Usyk fight and this fight, potentially.
If this ends up being a Matchroom show, you tell me who's putting on bigger shows in the UK than Eddie.
This ends up being a Matchroom show. He's making a lot of people's jobs a lot harder. Frank Warren's job and Ben Shalom's.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's see what develops.
Well, as far as a more competitive UK market, Eddie Hearn very recently said, "We work in a spiteful business where people make decisions not based on business logic, but based on ego and bravado, blocking and stopping. That's the game we're in." He was referencing Sky Sports placing the winning bid for the Joshua versus Usyk fight in spite of Anthony Joshua not being under contract with Sky. It's almost like the people at Sky wanted to ensure that their competitor doesn't get that fight.
What'd they spend for those rights? $28 million.
Matchroom, in many ways, has already made their money because they sold the rights to the fight to the Saudis, at which point the Saudis auctioned off the rights to the fight to Sky Sports, who placed the winning bid.
Which in turn cut DAZN out of the deal as far as the United Kingdom.
Who knows who's going to be showing the fight in the United States and several other territories? Will DAZN be carrying the fight? Or will the Saudis continue to auction off those rights to the highest bidder? Your guess is as good as mine, though in any event, it's a strange move. Sky Sports spending so much to get the rights to that fight when they don't have Anthony Joshua.
They're not doing business with Matchroom anymore, and they don't have Anthony Joshua under contract. So you figure they're not going to want to pay through the nose for one fight.
You tell yourself, why would anybody want to pay through the nose for this fight? Big fight that it might be, when moving forward, Anthony Joshua is set to go all in with DAZN. You don't actually have him under contract, so Sky bidding on this fight as much as they did, it was a power play to where we just want to make sure DAZN doesn't get the fight. That if anybody's going to make money from this thing in the United Kingdom, it will be our platform, even if it is a Matchroom show.
Involving a Matchroom fighter.
Lest we forget, before this fight even got made, news broke ahead of the first Alexander Usyk fight that moving forward for the duration of Anthony Joshua's career, he's a Matchroom guy. He's a Matchroom fighter.
Sky Sports don't do no more business with Matchroom.
They saw that the rival competitor was set to have the biggest fight in the United Kingdom on their platform, their competitor being DAZN. And the people at Sky Sports decided to intervene.
Think about it. Matchroom sells the rights to the fight to the Saudis, assuming that the fight will end up being sold to DAZN.
By the Saudis, thereby allowing DAZN to capitalize from the fight as well. And in comes Sky, $28 million, the win and bid, and the rights to the fight end up over there, as opposed to your broadcast partner's platform.
Yeah, Sky's not making this big effort to poach any of Frank Warren's fighters. They're actively pursuing Matchroom fighters.
And they've been at it for some time. When Sky made their big announcement that they were staying in the sport of boxing and that they were going to be doing a lot of business with boxer moving forward, the first couple of fighters you saw were Matchroom fighters that had crossed over, Matchroom fighters that Ben Shalom and Adam Smith, the people at Sky, were courting, fighters you grew accustomed to seeing on Matchroom shows like Natasha Jonas, Savannah Marshall, April Hunter, Huey Fury,
Chris Billum Smith, Liam Smith,
Lawrence Okoli, who here today is still under contract with Matchroom, but it appears he was made a sizable offer by the people over there at Sky and Boxer in order to make him the face, as it were, the face of their particular brand of boxing. A cease and desist letter was issued out to the people over there at Sky and Boxer because at least for the time being, that guy's under contract. And you see what's going on. You see what Eddie's talking about. It's not like Adam Smith and Ben Shalom.
They're not trying to poach Frank Warren's fighters. They're trying to poach Eddie's.
They are trying to recapture and rebuild what they already had with Matchroom before they went their separate ways. That's what they're doing. They're making Eddie's job hard in the United Kingdom, and that's not all, folks. You've got Bob Arum making things hard for Eddie in the United States. By all rights, Bob should want to put his man, Artur Beterbiev, in the ring with Eddie's guy, Dimitri Bivol, because Bob's guy, he's not getting any younger. There's no bigger fight out there for him at this time than a Dimitri Bivol fight. But rather than doing that, what did he do? He set him up to go to London in the fall to take on Anthony Yarde, as if that fight is in any way, shape, or form a substitute for the fight with Dimitri.
Bob's blocking fights as best as he can in the United States, and so is the PBC. So is Al Heyman.
How many offers from Matchroom have been rejected by PBC fighters in the last 3 or 4 years? Think about it. Really sit down and think about it. An offer to Jermall Charlo, offer to Gervonta Davis, 2 offers for 2 separate fights involving Adam Kovnowski, one for a Joshua fight, more recently for a Chizoria fight. Luis Ortiz, years ago, claimed that he really wanted a Joshua fight. They offered it to him, and his own team fumbled the bag. His own team mismanaged that situation.
More recently, Eddie Hearn wanted to do a fight between Conor Benn and Keith Thurman. No luck there either.
No dice. Fat chance you get Keith Thurman to jump on a plane and fight in the United Kingdom, though I'll go as far as saying that I think Eddie would be willing to do such a fight in the United States if Keith Thurman were receptive to it, but he's not. Keith Thurman, one of these guys, he'd rather sit out doing nothing than go to a rival platform, even if there's a lot of money in it for him. And this is what Eddie Hearn is talking about. You got a lot of outfits out there that do what they're doing, not because it makes business sense, but out of spite and egos. Leonard Ellerby's constant tirades.
Bear in mind, Mayweather Promotions doesn't have the size and resources of a Matchroom.
By all accounts, all Leonard Ellerby is an employee. Floyd Mayweather's glorified water boy. But even he...
These different outfits have turned this into a pissing contest. It's a very competitive market transatlantically right now.
There's a lot of hard feelings, a lot of big egos, and Eddie's not off base when he says what he says. That's what's going on, and that's what I told you would happen.
Finally, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn had this to say. He says, to fight Canelo Alvarez again, Dimitri Bivol might have to fight Joshua Buatsi and Gilberto Ramirez. That fight's not a definite because we can't just wait until May. Also, don't forget, Bivol wants the Beterbiev fight. Eddie Hearn has stated they intend to file an exemption request with WBA to allow Dimitri Bivol to defend his WBA light heavyweight world title versus Joshua Buatsi next in October, before his ordered mandatory defense versus Gilberto Ramirez. Why is Eddie Hearn so insistent that Dimitri face Joshua Buatsi if he's under orders to face Zerto?
They were in the midst of negotiations when that order from the WBA came down, though it doesn't seem like the fight was finalized as there was no official announcement. If you add both Joshua Buatsi and Zerto Ramirez into the equation...
When's Canelo supposed to fight him?
Maybe that's the point. Maybe what Eddie Hearn is trying to do is keep Dimitri Bivol busy, keep him so preoccupied that he's not available for Canelo to fight him for a second time because, let's face it, a lot of people don't like Canelo Alvarez's chances against Dimitri Bivol at light heavyweight, and that's where Canelo Alvarez said he'd fight him again. He's not bringing him down to super middleweight. He means to return to the light heavyweight division, and most people agree they don't like Canelo Alvarez's chances in that fight, in that rematch.
Against a naturally bigger guy who's unbeaten, all in his prime, and has a stylistic advantage over Canelo Alvarez.
I maintain my original position. There's no shame shame in a naturally smaller fighter like Canelo Alvarez going up to light heavyweight and losing to the likes of Dimitri Bivol? Because how many guys who started out as welterweights and campaigned as junior middleweights and super middleweights, how many of those guys do you see volunteering to fight Dimitri?
For all those guys who want to shame Canelo Alvarez for faltering at light heavyweight
And dropping a decision to Dimitri Bivol, when are we going to see Jermall Charlo step up to the plate? What about Demetrius Andrade? What about David Benavidez? If there's some kind of...
If Canelo Alvarez is supposed to be ashamed of himself for losing to Dimitri, let those guys go up there and let them do better.
Put up a shut up, take a shit, or get off the pot.
And let their sycophant fans urge them to do the same.
Instead of circling on the outskirts, waiting for Canelo Alvarez to acknowledge their existence, why don't they go up there and take on that same Dimitri Bivol that Canelo Alvarez just fought and see if they can't do one better?
You know those schmucks aren't about to do that, and that's why there's no shame in Canelo Alvarez venturing north of super middleweight.
Where all these other schmucks dare not venture to take on the likes of a Dimitri Bivol and dropping a decision. Because I can guarantee you, Dimitri would beat them easier than he beat Canelo Alvarez. So in the end, if it seems like Eddie Hearn is placing undue emphasis on Dimitri Bivol taking on Joshua Buatsi ahead of a Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez fight, it's likely because he wants to keep that guy busy. He wants to keep him preoccupied. He doesn't like Canelo Alvarez's chances against Dimitri in a rematch any more than anyone else does.
Think about it. If the WBA grants him that exemption to the mandatory,
He fights Joshua Buatsi, he's gonna have to fight Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez right after that because Gilberto is his mandatory. He won't be able to fight Canelo Alvarez and keep that WBA title at the same time. He's gonna have to take care of business against Zurdo. And beyond a Zurdo Ramirez fight, he's likely going to want the winner of Beterbiev versus Yard.
so you're talking about 2 to 3 fights if the WBA grants him that exemption to the mandatory.
One of Eddie Hearn's other prize stallions is already involved in a very risque rematch that most people don't think he can win. And I'm talking about Anthony Joshua versus Alexander Usyk. So when he looks over at Canelo and he sees that Canelo wants a second fight with Dimitri Bivol at light heavyweight, he tells himself,
Yeah, maybe Canelo Alvarez might want that fight, but he doesn't need it.
he goes in there with Gennady in September. He stops that guy the way a lot of people think he's going to stop that guy. He goes back up to light heavyweight, takes on Dimitri for a second time. What the hell's he going to do differently? What the hell's he going to do differently in a rematch that he didn't do in a second fight when the same things that were working against him in the first fight, they will still be working against him in the second?
Yeah, his pride might leave him feeling so inclined to go back up there and run it back, but
It looks a lot like Canelo Alvarez has hit his ceiling. Venturing north of super middleweight is very risky for the cash cow of boxing, and I don't think Eddie Hearn wants to risk it.
he wants to keep Dimitri busy.